Hello students, nice to have you once again, and like I said in the last session, we will be looking at revivalism today, and we will pick up some of the things that we had mentioned in the last presentation and build from there. During the 1920s, patriotic Indians who were a part of our freedom struggle, they initiated institution building activities with an appropriate architecture for institution buildings, and one of those was the Banaras Hindu University. Now, their turn to think of experiments with built form as a symbol of national identity. As I mentioned last time, this was already done, an attempt was made by the British when they used Indo-Sasanic architecture to build on that sense of national identity, and we had seen that in several presentations back. Now, one other example of revivalism was Shanti Nikitan under the mentorship of Rabindranath Tagore. And the architecture of Shanti Nikitan was not purely from Indian historical examples or revivalist, it also carried with it certain European tendencies. For example, it was an eclectic mix of Hindu revivalism that, for example, you see in the column here, or in some other features, for example in this building here, which is a direct derivation of the Chaitya Hall or Chaitya Graha, to classical order pilasters that, for example, you see here in this house. So, there is a mixture of identities within the Shanti Niketan. So, under Rabindranath Tagore, painter Surendranath Kar, who was from 1892 to 1970, he designed residential buildings which were called as the Utrayan Complex, and different eclectic styles were found within this residential set of buildings. One, for example, was the residential building called Shamali that I just showed you. This is a combination of the mud houses of Assam here, and so the mud architecture that you find in Shamali, whereas the overall form of Shamali is borrowed from the Chaitya Graha, that is the entrance to the Chaitya Hall, and that is the form of the Shamali. So, this is how it was merged together. It has also been called as the aristocratic folk paradigm, but maybe we will look at it some other time, or you can look it up yourself. I tried to study it, but unfortunately I was not able to go deep into it. Then we come to a very strong example of revivalism in India, the Vidhan Saudha in Bangalore from 1952 to 57. It was designed or executed by the PWD in Karnataka, and it is the evidence of Dravidian temple style architecture very clearly. So, if you look at the Vimana of the Dravidian style temple, and then you look at the Shikhara of the Vimana, you find that the top of the Vidhan Saudha, the dome at the entrance or porch of the Vidhan Saudha, is direct derivation of the Shikhara of the Vimana that you see here. And so, if you try to compare the images or the images of this impact of regional identity, if you compare BHU with the Vidhan Saudha, we find that in BHU it is a derivation of the Shikhara of the North Indian temple vis-a-vis the Vimana of the Dravidian or the South Indian temple in the Vidhan Saudha. So, in revivalism, regional identities had played a role. The historical example from which that particular region's revivalist architecture is borrowed from that region's historical architecture. So, this is the Shikhara in the case of BHU, and this is the Vimana in the case of the Vidhan Saudha. Now, the buildings are revivalist in appearance, but in their layout and plan they are typically classical or neoclassical. This is the same point that we had made when we were looking at Indo-Sasanic buildings also, where I pointed out that though Indo-Sasanic buildings were an amalgamation of traditional Indian elements with Western architecture, but the layout continued to remain Western neoclassical layout. And so we find whether the building is revivalist as in the Vidhan Saudha or in the IIT BHU, or it is the colonial of the IIT Roorkee or the Capitol building of Washington, all of them are these two of course are neoclassical buildings, the classical plan, but the revivalist buildings also follow that classical layout. Now, there is a similar elevation block or elevation, similar neoclassical layout of the building, whether we look at Indo-Saracenic or revivalist or colonial, all three of them in India. And this is the kind of plan structure. This is the central block which has the entrance porch, and there is a dome here, and then you have these two wings spread on either side. So we find that in the Umaid Bhavan Palace, we find that in the Vidhan Sauda, and we find that in this colonial building. Then again there is the combination of the domes and the piers or the kind of minarets on the sides, or the chhatris on the sides. For example, this. So what you find here is there is the central combination of the dome with few chhatris surrounding it. It can be the Pancharatana form as of the Bengal temple that I showed you earlier. There are the bigger dome with the 4 small domes or chhatris around it. We find that in the Umaid Bhavan Palace. We do find that in the Vidhan Sauda. We do find that in this building. And there are 3 different styles. Then you find the side chhatris, the corner chhatris, and it's here, and it's here. So there is a certain kind of similarity in the overall form, layout, planning of the buildings, whatever be the outer garment the buildings are wearing, and we will come back to this point about the outer garment again. Now there is also the idea of the axial symmetry. So we look at the aerial view of the same 3 buildings, and we find all of them have got a very strong axial symmetry. All of them carry the same kind of idea of a porch with a dome in the middle, here and here, and then there are these wings on either side. So revivalism per se symbolized the direction the revivalists would have liked architecture in post-independent phase in India to take. We do find revivalism, for example, in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan that I had given you a glimpse of last time, but it is more a classic example of deco-sarcenic. It's another word being coined to be able to define what this building looks like, because it is deco in the way the building is curved and the way the entire profile is, but the elements that are used there are that of the Hindu temple form, or the traditional Hindu temple form, so the word Sarcenic. So it's a combination of the clean geometry of Art Deco with Hindu temple architectural features. So revivalism of the Hindu temple architecture, with the central portion being a modified shikhara. As you can see, this is the temple shikhara, the pinnacle of the temple, North Indian temple. So that is here in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and then you have the smaller shikharas on the side, and but when you go inside the building, it's a completely modern space. So that is a kind of a tension that developed in these buildings again and again, that though the form of the building could be made to look Indo-Saracenic or Art Deco, colonial or revivalist, but the heart of the building was modern. Why? Because the needs of our society had changed, technology had changed, professions and occupations and businesses had changed. The buildings had to operate in a modern economy and in a modern environment. So you could make them appear in a particular style, but inwardly the heart of the building had to remain modern, and we'll come back again at a very standout point later on in this lecture. So revivalism in the modern Indian architectural movement, it is a bold and radical departure from mainstream contemporary architectural thinking in India. It represented a belief that the past can give certain sense and order to the present and be a source of identity and pride for a people who will see it as a part of their cultural heritage. The modern architectural movement was supposed to be an anti-reaction to Western impacts on India, whether it was Indo-Saracenic that you see here, whether it was colonialism, the Flagstaff House, whether it was Art Deco in Mumbai, or whether it was the Carmichael apartments by Matre as a part of modernism in Mumbai. I'm sorry, I hope this is, no, I'm sorry, this is not the Carmichael apartment, but this is an apartment building by Matre in Mumbai. So that is a part of modernism. The driving force behind this modern Indian architectural movement turned out to be Srish Chandra Chatterjee from 1872 to 1966. According to Chatterjee, he was motivated by the Swadeshi movement in the first that rose in the first 2 decades of the 20th century with the civil disobedience movement and the impact of the non-violent struggle of Gandhiji. In urban design, he turned to the canonical texts, that is the Shilpa Shastras, to establish the basis of his designs. The architectural inspiration that he drew from was Magadha, Mamalapuram, Ajanta and Ellora, Dilwara, Kanjivaram, Vijayanagar. All these different imageries that you see here, he learned from all of them. And the temple predecessor, the temple that he built in Delhi, the Birla Mandir, the design that he executed was the temples of Bhuvaneshwar. So when you look at the temple here, the Birla Mandir, and you look at the temple of Bhuvaneshwar, you find such a stark similarity between the form. But in his works, now this is what I was talking about that completely stands out. The modern requirements and plans only had the outer covering of these diverse traditional Hindu elements. This temple was for the modern times and for the modern needs. So though the form itself carried with it a traditional Hindu element temple form, and that also Bhuvaneshwar, but the building per se was a modern temple. It would carry with it drainage facilities, water lines, electricity, overall systematic administrative structure. The whole building was a modern building, topped up with the outer form of a traditional Indian temple. Did not have synthesis of design principles of Indian historical works, and that is something. So when we read this lack of synthesis of historical design due to the modern requirements, this that we could achieve in the olden times in the historical temples of India, we would find it difficult to achieve not only in this one building, but in so many other buildings that were built in our country or even in the West, which tried to borrow styles and forms from past historical periods. For example, if you look at the eclectic style forms of the Industrial Revolution period in the West, heavily borrowing from classical architecture, Renaissance and Gothic architecture, and trying to put them together in various eclectic combinations in their buildings. Those buildings still stand, they are a part of the European heritage or the British heritage, but the anti-reaction against that kind of architecture was that it doesn't really give us the form that a modern building should have. That is why the form for the tall building erupted, or rather came up, in Chicago and New York, where the pressure to build in a historical style was much less. And that is why when modern architecture did take deep roots in Europe in the early part of the 20th century, they did away with the so-called old historical forms completely to come up with these new geometries. Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, Alvar Aalto and so many others, which completely revolutionized what modern architecture would be in the 20th and now into the 21st century. And we have never looked back since. But that doesn't mean that the principles espoused in classical architecture are not there in these buildings, they are there. You see, principles that define symmetry, proportional, rationalism, the quality of aesthetics, etc., are universal principles. So that, or symmetry for example. So those universal principles remain true, but they get seen in architecture in different ways. So a building by Mies van der Rohe, a crown hall, which is a minimalist building in glass and steel, is actually having a very strong classical symmetry, as it would be there in a Greek temple. but shown in a very different way with very different materials in a very different time for a very different need. So this is the point that I want to make here, that we keep on repeatedly not able to succeed. At best we are able to create an outer form, but the building continues to remain and function for the modern man. Now, despite appearance, there was another thing about this building. It used concrete, which it had to, because of the technology that was available to us today. The flexibility of concrete was much more desirable, much more durable. But in 1940, Sirish Chatterjee actually published a manifesto for an All India League of Architects to promote new architecture of India based on historical principles. This in itself was a major contribution that he made in his writings. Chatterjee executed a small body of work, all of it important, all of it forming a valuable part of the revivalist movement, whether it was the Lakshmi Narayan or the Birla Mandir in Delhi, the Mahasabha Bhavan, the Arya Dharma Sangha Dharamshala in Sarnath, the Deshbandhu Memorial in Kolkata, the house for an Indian nobleman, the Ashok Singh Palace, the house of the Indian nobleman which is never built, but here is the design for it, the Ashok Singh Palace in Calcutta, which was his formally executed domestic project, all were revivalist. Then his focus on urban design and urban planning, the Vastu principle of town planning during the Vedic or the Indo-Aryanic period, and that was the idea of the Chaturmukha, it was applicable to all towns, from the largest towns to the smallest villages. The site itself was either square or rectangular, you can see it here also, and it had 4 faces in all 4 directions. The town layout was east to west lengthwise with 4 main streets, and there was a temple always at the center. For urban design, he stuck close to the canonical texts. Again, I refer back to the Shilp Shastras, and the generic design for an Indian village was for 5,000 persons, having a rectangular plan with a formal entrance gate on each side, a Chaturmukha design. So then the idea of the Indian village of tomorrow was a drawing that was done by Panchu Gopal Banerjee based on a proposal by Sirish Chandra Chatterjee, and that was predominantly a housing proposal having a temple at the center, a community hall, social training center and other public facilities, all appropriate for a hot and humid climate. Now to look at the revivalist idea in the actual plan of the Banaras Hindu University campus, which is based on Vedic principles, the Karmukha. It is suitable for a town site which is a town site is like a bow or semicircular or parabolic, and it is also meant to be suitable for towns located next to riverfronts or seashores. The main streets run north, south or east, west. There are cross streets that run at right angles to them, dividing the whole area into blocks. So this is the actual plan of BHU. This is the actual plan. The presiding deity installed in the temple, which is built at any convenient place within the Karmukha. The modernists were opposed to Chatterjee's ideas. And of course that was bound to happen, because they thought, and we will again come back to this point in the next presentation when we look at the first generation of Indian architects from 1945 to 1970, they said revivalism is taking us backward. But Chatterjee is important because his thinking is still with us. There is a desire to be Indian, and it has always led to an architecture of at least partial revivalism, if not a total image carryover from the past. And one example we see is in the works of Satish Grover. Later on we will see a much more subtle impact of traditional or vernacular architecture on modern buildings in India, which would be truly defined by John Lang as the modern Indian architecture, and that is under critical regionalism or regional modernism, where the building is modern, it has vernacular principles embedded within it. It speaks to us of a modern Indian building. There is no denying it. It's a modern building, but an Indian building. It is different from revivalism, because revivalism clearly shows in its form that this is borrowed from traditional forms. A critical regional building is much more subtle in the way those forms are presented to us. But with regard to the works of Satish Grover, I would say that they fall between outright revivalism and the more subtle regional modernism. And that is, his early work was strictly modernist, which was inspired by Corbusier and Walter Gropius. But when he designed the Oberoi Hotel in Bhuvaneshwar, where the form was based on abstractions of traditional building patterns, it was revivalism in a modern context. And the reason why Satish Grover could do, which I believe as such an interesting job of coming up with a 5-star hotel with a revivalist idea or a modern revivalist design, is because of the deep historical study that Satish Grover has done. You know, as well as you might be aware of, that there are some very relevant books on Indian history that have been written by Satish Grover. I believe there is one major book written by him, and that goes to show that the deeper you study, the more you can bring it out in your designs, if that is also your forte. So historical architecture into a modern hotel as the Oberoi of Bhuvaneshwar. Unlike the addition of few historical features, here the overall form is based on the historical concept, and this is where he is a step ahead of just revivalist buildings with a modern layout, but a form which is borrowed from traditional architecture, because here he encapsulates the concept of the hotel, though modern, is derived in its basic so-called structure from traditional architecture. So here this building is conceived as a synthesis, an amalgamation of two ancient styles, Hindu and Buddhist. The design. The plan is essentially made of 3 squares, 1, 2, 3. But these 3 squares are all of different sizes and they grow. This is the smallest, and I believe then this one followed by this one. This gradual upgradation of the scale of the square is similar to the gradual enlargement of the architectural volume of the traditional Hindu temple from the earlier part as you move towards deeper into the temple towards the Garbhagriha, and you are right underneath the main shikhara at the back of the temple form grows and enlarges. The intent is to create this or recreate this linear movement through the Hindu temple within that of a modern 5-star hotel. And the other aspect of it is that the courtyard is a reminder of Buddhist monasteries. This is the courtyard, a modern 5-star hotel's courtyard facing the swimming pool. These are the cubicles or the viharas within the Buddhist monastery clustered around the main congregational space. Here the congregational space being out in the open, a swimming pool, which, as you know, becomes the congregational space for a 5-star hotel. And the plan of the rock cut vihara that you see here, these cubicles, they become the rooms around the courtyard with the pool in the middle of the Oberoi Hotel. And this is the picture of that. So this idea has been brought in here, but it is a synthesis. It is only a person who has read the actual vihara design or studied it, and then he studies the Oberoi Hotel, and then he is able to see it is not visible to your naked eye because the form is synthesized, it is amalgamated. You are taking two different entities and merging them to create a new entity. Do you remember? In one of my earliest lectures I had defined the word amalgamation. This is what is happening in the works of Satish Grover. So the evidence of the presence of Buddhist and Hindu identity in Oberoi Hotel is in a way that you have to be knowledgeable or scholarly enough to be able to identify that. The fusion of traditional and modern is also been an important idea behind premium hotels in India, particularly because those that accommodate foreign tourists in the 1970s, 1980s, we see that in the Ashok Hotel, we see that here in the Oberoi Hotel Bhuvaneshwar, because they were to project the image of India to the foreign tourist or the foreign clients. So there is obviously the more obvious Indian traditional elements like the columns in the interior spaces or the stone artwork in the interior spaces. Then there is the Buddhist temple in Pattaya in Thailand by Grover in 1983. It is near the lake shore, approximately 160 kilometers from Bangkok. A number of Buddhist pavilions were built there to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the birth of the King of Thailand, and the Indian pavilion was an attempt to have a new and creative design. So this Buddhist temple done by Satish Grover is a pavilion which is a symbolic reference to Buddhist architecture of the Ashoka period. Grover refrained again from making a verbatim copy. Rather than just making a Buddhist temple to resemble that of, for example, the most famous of them all, the Sanchi Stupa, he goes in and merges different identities into this one pavilion, which carries with it the idea of the Chaitya Hall and the Sanchi Stupa and other features which we will look at. For example, the prototype has been developed by interpretation of the Chaitya Hall of Karli and Bhaja caves of Western India. So this is the picture. So many of you might have reflected on this picture in your Bannister Fletcher book. This is the actual Chaitya Hall, and this is the section of the Chaitya Hall, and this is the section that you would find here in this Buddhist pavilion by Satish Grover. And then it is raised on a plinth, which is a typical feature of a Indian temple or a Hindu temple, as you find it here. And so you find it here also, Hindu temple raised on a plinth. When you look at the plans are postmodernist. Remember that he is making it in the 1980s, at a time when postmodernism was spreading like wildfire in the West, right? The time of modernism was over, late modernism had come and was carrying on, and the parallel movement was postmodernism. So you do find this postmodernist identity in his work, but it is a postmodernist Indian identity, not a European postmodernist identity. Now there is, for example, the Vedika and the Stamba. The Vedika was supposed to be this fence which is to define the precincts of a sacred space, which can be, the sacred space can be a stump. So the Vedika is around the stump. It can be a Chaitya Hall, or in this case it is the Bodhi tree and the Vedika is around it. So the Vedika and the stump have a role, and the combination of the Vedika and the stump, the Vedika and the Bodhi tree, the Vedika and the Chaitya Hall. So the right, this is a concrete stump which is capped by a stainless steel cupola. I'm sorry, this is the one. This is the stump actually, but this is the stump of Satish Grover, which is capped by a stainless steel cupola, and this suggests the Ashoka pillar. And then around the stump is the Vedika, and there is the Vedika that is also defining the precinct of the not only the Stamba but also the Chaitya Hall or the Buddhist pavilion designed by Grover. Now on the left is conceptually a gateway, that is the Toran that you see here in the Sanchi Stupa, and this is the Toran here that he has provided off axis to the Buddhist pavilion. It's there. And then the entire finish is in white ceramic tiles, so that would be a modern material. The stupa, where is the stupa? It's here. The stupa is just symbolically represented. An entire built form, probably the most important built form of Buddhist architecture has been relegated to the background, where the pavilion or the Chaitya hall form takes over, and the stupa is just evidenced here right in the front of the pavilion, over the main entrance and on the side of the Toran. And then there is the Chatra Spire, which is represented over the stupa, just as this is the Chatra Spire at the top of the stupa here. But the scale is completely interchanged. You have this big dome of the stupa, so to speak, and then you have this small Chatra Spire, but here you have a small stupa and a big Chatra Spire. Not only that, there is one more thing. The Chatra Spire on top of the Buddhist pavilion by Grover is inverted. If you look at the Chatra Spire here, it goes from the bigger plate to the smaller one, and here it is the smaller to the bigger one. So this is the Chatra Spire as you see it here in the Buddhist pavilion. So what do you find here? You find here a synthesis done by Grover. You find here a very studied revivalism. You find here a reflection of Hindu and Buddhist identity in a building, which requires a scholarly analysis, which requires a sense of a meditative study of the work, to be able to put all the pieces together and see how he synthesized them. Is it a good synthesis? Is it a great synthesis? I may not be the judge of that. You be the judge of that. But what I am saying is, the attempt was made by him. In the Oberoi Hotel, the attempt was made by him. And you would require a scholarly study to identify that. Maybe in the other buildings where the form dominates over a so-called Western or a modern plan, maybe a lot of scholarly study is not needed. You know it. This is Indo-Sasanic, this is colonial, this is revivalist. It's very evident from there, but not here. Thank you so much for joining today. We'll go to the first generation of Indian architects, 1945 to 1970, in the next lecture. Thank you so much.